Neil from Essex here to show you a rock bucket that's been on the front of my tractor here for about the last 6 months. We're going to spend a little bit of time here working in my backyard. We're going to talk about what rock buckets can be good for, the kind of work that you might find one is useful for, and also this particular one, which is a little bit interesting. It's one from Artilian that can do some double duty as a grapple. So we're also going to talk about this and the way that it works as a grapple and the compromises and benefits that you might find in this kind of solution.
Essex, a helping hand with your land.
So first, the rock bucket portion of this setup. The orange portions here, Artilian sells as a rock bucket, and we sell rock buckets from many different vendors for everything from small compact tractors up to large skid steers. But the Artilian version here is made with smaller compact tractors in mind. Now, rock buckets tend to be used a little bit different than what a dirt bucket is. The time that I find that I like to use this is when I'm working into, say, rocks, quite obviously, or debris. When you want something just a little bit more rugged than what your traditional bucket might be, and you haven't spent the money for things like cutting edges and tooth bars, having a bucket like this gives you kind of like that demolition option, right? When you don't want to bend up your traditional bucket, you can throw one of these on the front. And I don't think twice about taking this thing and shoving it into a large pile of rocks and trying to see what I can pick up and move. You'll notice how the front of these are built. There's some serrations on the front of this to do a little bit of tearing, and then zigzag teeth that goes across the front. These kind of function a little bit like a tooth bar would if you were to choose to put one of those on your bucket. It's going to help loosen soils and rip stuff up as you go and push into a pile. Now, the bottom of this rock bucket is going to be tines, and there's grapples that also have tines set up like this across the bottom, but this is a little bit different. These tines are spaced about every 2 inches across the bottom of the bucket, and they're going to catch things like this. Rocks and that kind of stuff when you scoop into that pile of dirt are going to be kept here in the bucket. And if you have dirt that's loose and dry enough, by shaking that dirt, you're able to sift it a little bit and have that loose stuff fall out the bottom while collecting the debris. You could build one of these to be a little bit more lightweight by not having as many tines or spacing them out more. That would allow you to lift a little bit larger load, but you're going to lose that ability to sift out the smaller stuff. And say a rock about this big is going to be caught here at about a 2-inch tine, and if it was a whole lot bigger than this, this kind of thing would fall through. So I think 2 inches here is probably about a good spacing to look for in this kind of bucket. So one thing that Artilian did different on this bucket is to recognize that the gap between what is a rock bucket and a grapple with a floor really isn't all that much, right? Except for spacing the tines out for a little bit more. A rock bucket is very similar to what a grapple would be. And so they gave an option here to add the lids onto the top of the bucket, enabling you to close that over and grab a load. I'm always kind of looking for like the one bucket that can stay on the front of my tractor all the time, and I'm not going to be switching it out for other stuff, right? Kind of some of that functionality that you find from a 4-in-1, or people often will point out the fact that their pallet forks spend more time on the front of their loader than their dirt bucket does, right? I like the idea of having versatile stuff on my front loader. As easy as things are to change, it's always nicer not to have to do that. This setup, I think, is interesting in that way, right? You have a functional dirt bucket that allows you to carry things like firewood. I can scoop up dirt, I can scoop up debris, but I also have the grapples up here on the top to be able to reach over and grab a log or something and carry it around. There's things I like and things I wish were done a little bit differently when it comes to these grapples. Having 2 lids, I feel, is really important. I don't particularly care for the root rake style grapples with a single lid that comes around, because I often find when trying to grab multiple logs or a misshaped load, having 2 things that come over and grips a load in 2 different places secures that load a lot better than a single lid that comes around. I don't end up dropping as much with this style lid. That said, I feel there's a little bit more of a compromise here that does happen when doing it with this bucket. Weight aside, because the bucket's a little bit heavier, I can't grab large things quite as well. If I wanted to get into, say, a large log, the way that the side of the bucket here is shaped doesn't allow me to get in and under that log very well. So personally, if I would have designed this, I would have cut the sides down of the bucket a little bit more. would have not been as good of a bucket that way, but it would have allowed this to be able to grab large logs a little bit easier than what it can. I haven't found a whole lot yet that I haven't been able to lift and manipulate, but I also have an Artelian iron fist grapple with a more traditional grapple lid on it that can wrap around that log and grab a hold of it, and that definitely does a better job at grabbing logs than what this design does. So you can see here a little bit about what I mean by the bucket sides. You take this log here that obviously is not small, right? This is 16 feet long and it's about 16.8 inches around down here at its thickest part. It's a meaningfully large log. But the bucket here, because of the sides, the grapple's not able to really reach around this and truly grab it. So the points do here hold it in place a little bit, but if that was cut back a little bit further, you'd be able to grab something much larger. Now, we're getting the job done, right? And maybe I'm a little spoiled by the other grapples that I've had out here before. Artelian's iron fist grapple will kind of reach around this and grab it better. That's the grapple that I find I'm leaving on the front of the tractor more often than not. But here's the compromise, right? Cool setup in that it can do a lot of different things. We can grab that dirt, we can grab that concrete, we can lift the debris, carry it around, but there are limitations in the size of the log that you can grab. So in my backyard, I actually have a lot of use for a rock bucket. My backyard here used to be part of a farm, and back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, they used to have a dump back in here where they dumped all their trash. I've spent a lot of time cleaning up almost 100-year-old garbage that's been back here. But one of those spots is right here in front of me. So I've had this hump back in here, and after scratching around with my bucket for a little while, I found that hump is here because there's hunks of concrete that are buried in here. So if I come over here with my bucket, push into this pile, you'll see here that I can come up with some of those hunks of concrete, but by shaking my bucket around, some of that soil and stuff I can allow to drop out of the bottom, kind of leaving that in place when I go and dump the blocks of concrete here over in a place that I actually need them. Oftentimes when you're shopping for a grapple, you have that kind of like the big log in mind, right? Like the trunk that I was lifting up and carrying around. But there's great utility in these things too for cleaning up the tops of the trees, right? The smaller debris, the things that fall down from the trees every year, right? I'm out here cleaning up after a winter time now where I've had a lot of trees come down. The way that I tend to do that is to keep my grapple open and walk around and pick all that stuff up and throw it into the grapple. And it's handy because it's a great tool to be able to grab all those loose sticks and that kind of stuff, and then you close the grapple and hold them in place as you're able to drive off to your burn pile. But there's an added benefit to this style here that I think is worth pointing out. In that scenario, the tough thing with being able to pick stuff up and throw it into the grapple is smaller stuff like this, right? Root rake grapples, you can't really pinch it from this direction. In fact, you can't stack into a root rake well at all. Or a traditional grapple with floors underneath of it, small things like this tend to want to fall out. But when you have a bucket like this, I could take anything up to about 4 feet across, and when I go and throw it into here, it can just rest down here in the bottom of the bucket while my larger branches will sit up here on the top. So that's a little bit on the Artelian rock bucket and their accompanying grapple. I love that this company does innovative stuff, right? There's a lot of alternatives out there on the market, but the stuff from these guys always is a little bit different than what's offered by everyone else. And while I don't necessarily think this is for every customer, there's compromises in this setup. It might be for you. There is a customer for this. It's that person that wants to have one attachment out on their front loader that they could do a little bit of everything with and avoid having to switch things back and forth as easy as that can be. So if you're shopping for one of these, we're glad to help. We have a full inventory of attachments. You can give us a call at 800-222-3373 or look us up at Messick's.com.